This is the Infrastructure Matters podcast, brought to you by the Futurum Group. We explore the latest developments in hybrid cloud computing and the technology that underpins it. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the latest trends and technologies that are shaping the hybrid cloud computing landscape. The Infrastructure Matters podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Please do not take anything reflected in this show as investment advice. Now your co-hosts, Stephen Dickens, Camberley Bates, and Krista Macomber of the Futurum Group.
Hey, welcome to episode 19 of Infrastructure Matters. It is the Power Girls, or Power Ladies, I should say. Camberley and Krista Macomber, welcome to us this morning. We've got a few things to run by. There's been some announcements, a lot of earnings. We're not going to cover the earnings today, but we're going to cover some of the announcements that have happened and what we're anticipating maybe for the next couple of weeks, which is getting like crazy busy. I'm sorry. So thanks, Krista, for joining. Oh, I have to say one more thing. I know this is really, I have a new cup. It's with the bike.
I love it.
New cup. Okay. So now that we're through the fun stuff, let's talk about the real stuff. Commvault earnings this week. Nice job.
Yes, definitely. So their revenue was up almost 7% year to year. And that actually was a beat on their earnings guidance. So that was definitely very exciting to see. I had the pleasure of covering it. It was flexing a little bit of a muscle that I haven't used in a bit of time, but good to get back into it for the earnings coverage. And what was especially kind of interesting to me was the fact that Metallic, which is kind of Commvault's, they've been operating it sort of as a separate division, but they're definitely taking steps to integrate this division with their kind of longer standing solution, Complete. But the Metallic business, which is effectively kind of their SaaS revenue, that was up actually 77% year to year. That was to $131 million for an annual recurring revenue. So definitely from my standpoint, a really great indication of all the work that not only Commvault has done to kind of grow that business, but also just some of the general demand that we're seeing for cloud hosting.
Yeah, absolutely. They've done it. You know, it was interesting when they came out with Metallic as a separate brand. And I'm thinking that it was like a couple of years ago, but it's probably more like 5 or something like that. The time frame just kind of merged right in. And it was kind of, purposefully, they were trying to separate themselves from, where they were. And now what we're seeing is that, well, maybe the enterprises have all grown up and saying, okay, we are in the cloud, we are on-prem, we got to do both. And anyway, so it's really good to see where they've been, and they've established a really strong footprint, which will do them very well over the period of time, in the years to come, as clients just start adopting more and more of this hybrid space and understanding that they need to protect that area.
Absolutely. And it's been, to your point, a little bit of a double-edged sword almost for Commvault, because like you mentioned, that business has been just really doing fantastic in the marketplace. But at the same time, from the perspective of customers, I think there's been a little bit of a disconnect, between Metallic and the core division. So they're actually hosting an event next week in New York City. I'm actually going to have the opportunity to be there, which is exciting. And so, I think they're going to be talking a little bit more during that event on kind of their roadmap, kind of for the business, not only really kind of protecting, these hybrid cloud environments, but also kind of their general push for data security and things like that. So there will definitely be more to update next week. And actually the earnings launch is a little bit of a preview to that. So it's, I think all good and really interesting to be watching the evolution.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely, definitely. Then there was, this week we had an AR conference with Nutanix. And for you guys who don't quite know who Nutanix is, Nutanix came out many years ago as hyperconverged infrastructure system, HCI system. Used to run completely on VM, or they actually had their own VM AHV, and now we did put a research note out, and it's titled that Dave Raffo really authored, and I loved his title. It goes like Nutanix preps for VMware takeover. It's like, okay, so
no guesswork there.
No guesswork there. I mean, there was a one time they had a campaign that was called No VMware Tax. So even though they're selling that portion of it, 50% of their business is still VMware platform. So it's been interesting to seeing them going through this transition to where their own AHV VM is established. So it wasn't a huge amount there was some focus on the VMware takeover, what their thinking is, and it's no different than what everybody else is talking about. What is Octane going to do? What's the investments going to be? What are the staffing going to be? All that kind of stuff. So maybe next week we'll hear. Maybe they're going to actually close it today, which is the 3rd of November that we're taping this. But so here are some of the big things that were there. Project Beacon, they focused on. This was announced, I think, at their conference in last spring at .next. And Project Beacon is looking at data services. And what we're seeing with data services, and I think you've seen this as well with some of the NetApp things, et cetera, with all the work they're doing. But the data services are looking at how do we create this platform that enables on-prem, off-prem capabilities, and also enabling something called the Kubernetes folks over there, those DevOps people, easy self-service to things like database. And so part of that is like a database as a service. For those of you that don't know about the new applications that are coming on, those new applications tend to have multiple databases. It used to be that we have monolithic systems, one type of database that was used for the entire app, that was Oracle or IMSDB or something like that. But today we have multiple databases that are part of that entire app, as we have these, the smaller, containers that are operating that entire environment. So this enables the customers or the DevOps people to easily access databases, attach them to it, and then also for them not to have to worry about maintaining all the updates and the security and everything else that's there. So that was a pretty big deal.
So with Camberley, when we think about Nutanix, trying to kind of increase that foothold against VMware, would that be kind of what you say is the key you see for them, or what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think it's multifold. I mean, what they're focusing on that because so much of the business is there and that's going to impact them. But the other piece of it is really where they're at is they're, instead of calling hyper-converged infrastructure, it's now hybrid cloud infrastructure. So you can deploy them on-prem, you can deploy them up in the cloud. So they're streamlining this thing so it's it's an easy way to move back and forth if you need to in your environments. The second big area they've gone into, and save the space, but because we're going to be doing a video with them next week at KubeCon, is moving into the containers environment. So hyper container infrastructure, maybe you want to call this thing. So they've got partnerships with Red Hat and SUSE and all the others. Wanting to see them do a whole lot more integration with those systems to make it more ease of use. Their offering sits on top of their AHV, so it is it's not a bare metal. It's sitting on their AHV VM. So we're gonna stay tuned on that one. So that's where they're at.
Sounds good.
The other piece that they addressed there is, if you missed it, they announced a partnership with Cisco, which is really big because they've got all these salespeople out there that can move it. Now, Cisco had a partnership, or had an offering, not a partnership, called HyperFlex HCI. Didn't do particularly well, so this is they've end of life, or support's going to end in about 5 years for that offering. But this is their new bringing something to the cloud, and that will move their UCS servers, which is important. So they're making sure that they're part of that that ecosystem that customers are buying, which is hyperconverged systems. In particular, if you look at the market, probably 50% of the hyperconverged systems out there are for VDI, and the other ones are for traditional application database systems, et cetera. So now what we're expecting them to do is move into that container space. And also they've launched a while ago a GPU in a box kind of offering that we've seen with other people. So those are some of the highlights. We'll put the research note. There's a few other things in there that can highlight, but kind of getting you a nit on what was going on there.
Yep, absolutely. And one thing on that,
Catalogic. You want to talk about Catalogic?
Sure. So we had a great conversation with Catalogic, and they have announced this past week a self-hosted option for CloudCasa, which is their data protection software, essentially backup and recovery for Kubernetes environments, speaking of containers, and for cloud databases as well. So we've seen to date that CloudCasa has been kind of exclusively sold through the software as a service, the SaaS model, so hosted in AWS and kind of delivered by CloudCasa. But what we've seen, and is kind of a great reminder to me of where the industry is at, we've had all of this cloud washing for so many years now that sometimes it's easy to forget that the public cloud is not, feasible for a lot of customers in industries, for example, like telecom, where, maybe there are requirements for data privacy or data sovereignty, especially since GDPR over in Europe over the last several years. And also there just may be some concerns over performance and latency when we think about backup and recovery performance. So what CloudCasa is doing is it's offering customers the ability to host this, data protection software within kind of their own environment. So that includes kind of the compute infrastructure, it includes the storage infrastructure, and the customer also has the opportunity to deploy their own MongoDB database for the data catalog. So if there are concerns around, kind of privacy for that. So it's, again, this interesting use case because I think for many great reasons, Catalogic has been very bullish around kind of that SaaS model for this particular market. And it does make sense for a lot of reasons. But again, they've been getting this feedback in these particular industries and particular use cases and kind of are taking this step to meet those. So it'll be interesting to see, kind of the uptick in the customer reaction. And again, I think just a great reminder that, while the public cloud is really great for a lot of things, it's especially for data security and privacy today, it's not always feasible.
Yeah, they're going to get, that part of that is, whenever we get briefed with vendors and stuff, they talk about what they're doing in cloud or they have a data services in the cloud.
Yeah.
So like a Blue XP or something like that might be a cloud-based offering. And one of the first things Randy Kearns always asks is, "What are you doing for the dark sites?" Standard question. He's like, "Here's our list of questions we're going to ask you. Be prepared," because you have, if you want to play with, the DoD or any of the NSA entities, or that they're not going to go and put that. Yeah, there's FedRAMP that's up there, so there's that offering, but we still see many of them saying that no, we're not going to connect up there. There's too much risk in it, and for all the things. The other piece that you didn't mention is sovereignty. That was another one.
Yes.
So we're having that sovereignty piece of it, which means that if you're going to the sovereignty piece is that if you're going to be in that country, you're going to have to be in every one of those clouds. And if you're not part of, if you're not a first-class citizen, if you're not, within an AWS or Azure, and that can be really tough for a smaller firm. So this gives them the opportunity to bring that offering to, those countries, especially when you get over in Europe. There's quite a few countries now that are saying, no, you can't let the data go. You've got to leave it here. So it's been interesting to see how companies have been starting to unwind their centralized IT in order to meet the sovereignty piece of it. that GDPR, or not GDPR, I don't think it's GDPR, but the different countries are putting on the system. So that's
Absolutely.
very new areas. So getting to that, we wanted to talk a little bit about hosting versus on-premise and some of the challenges or the considerations one would have on that, how they're using it. So I'll turn it over to you first, and then I'll kind of chime in.
Sure. I think maybe to piggyback on some of these announcements that we've been covering. So I did talk about that, really tremendous growth from the SaaS division of Commvault, Metallic, and obviously we were just talking about, CloudCasa, which has been experiencing this great success with the software as a service model, but has had to kind of offer that on-prem deployment. So I think in particular, when we think about all of these cyber attacks that companies across the world and all industries are experiencing, kind of control over that backup data catalog, that becomes really important. So for the sovereignty issues that you were just discussing, Camberley, but also for the sake of, data privacy and data security, really. So again, the ability to make sure that that is kind of controlled on-prem when it needs to be, to make sure that that backup data catalog is, accessible, because that really is going to be the foundation of the ability to be able to search for data and recover data in the event that it needs to be recovered, which obviously is a significant concern when we think about data security and cyber attacks.
I also go to, and this is really a totally different kind of thing, that when you're looking for on hosting versus on-premise is the equivalency of the capabilities that you have of on-premise versus hosting. And some of them have more function in the cloud and less function on-prem. Depends upon where they start developing their stuff. The other piece of it is that, and I think most companies know this, when you're standing up environments, AWS is very different than Azure and is very different than GCP. And each one of those require different staffing or different skills. Maybe I could have somebody that's an expert on one and an expert on another, probably not an expert on all three, but they do take different skills. And so that's why, that there's advantages of having and using the hosting kind of capabilities. But there is also the level of labor, the labor piece of it that's going on top of it, especially as you're trying to button down and making sure the nuances for high availability, replication, data security, all the things that are the, I would call the sticky wickets. Isn't that croquet or something? The sticky wickets with the croquet. That you run into when you're working to implement the entire infrastructure and maintain that infrastructure. So that's another piece to be concerned with as they're looking at, where those things are. What's my skill base that I have? What's the equivalency of the technology, et cetera.
Yep. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, Camberley, because I think, so you mentioned that we sit on a lot of vendor briefings when it's, we have this new offering for the cloud. And one of the other conversations that we tend to ask, in addition to what are you doing for your dark site, is, how much refactoring needed to go on, whether it be for the software architecture, whether it be for, the storage architecture. So really to understanding, is there true feature equivalency there? Are there any potential gaps? You mentioned things like replication, for example. So certainly that's a consideration. And I think it's not always clear up front to the customer, right? Because, I think when we think about how these cloud solutions are positioned, of course, it's going to be talking about their highlights and things like that. So it can be a lot to really unpack in terms of really making sure there is that feature equivalency there. And, the other thing I would add is when we think about using the cloud, kind of leading into a discussion around cost economics, because different features are going to lead into cost economics. And I know we've done some T-scale modeling for customers that have looked into things like deduplication and compression, right? For in the storage software to make sure that data is being stored as efficiently as possible. And also capabilities like the ability to tier to a lower cost storage option, which again is going to have, very long-term implications on the overall cost of the solution. So it's definitely not easy to really look and compare when we think about costs and features. And like you mentioned, really making sure that the skills are there to be able to oversee all of this and navigate it.
Yeah. So another area that I'll bring up is the issue of, and this is not as much on the backup, I believe. You may know that, you probably know better than I do, but it is true on many of the other data storage operating systems and some of the other application areas, is whether or not it's on bare metal, or if it's on a VM, or if it, and how is, and as you were saying, how it's been refactored and that's part of the refactoring, right? So I know very, very early on, for instance, the Dell was starting to implement Isilon with Google, and that did not work well. The client's experience was not, they didn't get the full power of Isilon, now called PowerScale, but they didn't get the full power of that. So what we saw them, this is very, very early on, like 4 or 5 years ago, they were standing up the device right next to GCP to take advantage of the capabilities in order to make sure that the speed and capabilities are there. So now they've progressed farther to where they're doing more work on creating implementing the offerings in the different clouds on bare metal. But that's taken, as you said, the development effort for them to be co-working with those cloud environments to bring that out. So as clients are going up to saying, okay, I'm in the marketplace, I'm looking at the marketplace, I'm thinking about using, ABC technology or whatever, those questions need to be asked about what does that look like? Because just because it's running up there does not mean it's going to be the same performance capabilities that they have tuned the system for on-premise.
Yeah.
That's very, very important.
And the other thing that factors in there is kind of the networking capabilities and load balancing. We certainly can get some latency there as well, right? So that's just another factor in that equation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we've been doing some, our lab has been doing some testing, and in particular, the one area that we've done testing with, and there's some papers that are out there on VDI and in the cloud, and looking at the variances of performance with VDI instances with processors, et cetera. So it's been, it does vary. I mean, okay, here we are. Infrastructure matter, guys. So just because you're doesn't mean, and that's why they have so many instances. I mean, instances of whatever hardware you're going to be sitting on, is because you get to hopefully optimize the right processor types, the right IO types, the right protocol types, et cetera, that you're putting your systems on, and that's entirely new and different skill for the folks. So I know I'm not saying anything terribly new to these people, but again, it's a reminder about the things to be thinking about as you're looking at your applications.
So it's good to stay grounded, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a wrap for today. A little bit shorter than some of our other ones, but next week, stay tuned. We're going to be in QCon, so you'll be hearing a whole lot from us from that one. Hey, and need to remind you guys, you need to click the button, follow us, like us, everything, all that good stuff. That's kind of what we do, is making sure we're meeting the needs of the people that are listening to us. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much.